Hi, Julie. Welcome back.
Hi, Kathryn. So happy to be with you.
Yeah, absolutely. We are going to be talking about reclaiming fullness today. And this
Yes.
is a topic we're going to take in many different directions. And I'm really excited about it because I know this is something you teach a lot in the Brain Over Binge group as well.
Yes, it is. It is. I wanted to start with a quote, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
It's a Virginia Woolf quote, and I really like it. It's one cannot think well, love well, sleep well, if one has not dined well. It's really the truth. Like nothing works when you're not feeding yourself adequately.
Yeah. And it's something that we all kind of intuitively know, right? We can't live our life the way we want to live our life if we're walking around hungry all the time. But I
Yeah.
think what happens, a lot of people who are listening to this podcast, you may relate, you may have developed some negative associations with fullness over time. So that fullness may not feel good to you right now. It may bring up some fear, some anxiety, some different sensations that you've associated with being negative. So we want to address that and many other aspects of fullness as well.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Because it's my wish that everybody listening really, really learns to reclaim fullness, right? Like to recognize like it's good to be full. It's actually good to eat and feel full, not stuffed, but full, right? And it's interesting, even this weekend on the call, this came up. Many people come to me and say, yeah, but when I'm full, then I want to binge. And it's so interesting because when you've spent a lifetime, and remember for me, it was over 40 years of my life, right? A lifetime either restricting or binging, right? I was either here or here. I lived on these two planes, right? So full, what such a strange sensation. What does that mean? To eat until I'm full, right? And so for many people that I work with, it's such a foreign feeling. And when it happens, all this anxiety comes up. I must have done something wrong. I've eaten too much, right? As opposed to, oh no, this is the way it's supposed to feel when you eat until you're satisfied, right? You eat in a way where you never have to walk around starving again, fearing that you're not going to be able to make it until your next meal, right? It's such a different sensation, but it is not here in starving land and it's not here in binging land. It's someplace here.
Yeah. Yeah, it's finding that middle road. And I think if you are involved in restricting and binging, maybe the only time you're feeling full is when you binge. So then binging gets associated with fullness, and it's not that good level of fullness where you're satisfied and you can go on with your day. It's a fullness that is painful. It's a fullness that is just does not feel good, right? So then you start associating fullness with that pain and like you did something wrong. So relearning that normal level of fullness, it can take some practice.
Yeah, and I wouldn't actually call binging fullness. That to me is stuffed, overfull,
Mhm.
like eating until you're sick, right? Like, binging is a very specific thing, right? There's a big difference between eating a meal and being sated, full, in like where your belly is full and you're good and you've got energy to get on with your day, and eating in a binge where you are completely sick. I know for me, it's like you're so full you couldn't put any more food in your body if you tried. Your stomach hurts, it's distended, you have no energy, you can't focus, all of those things. Sometimes I couldn't even breathe, like it was hard to breathe. That's a really different extreme than, and that's what I mean. Like I just kind of want to break that break that connection between being full and binging because it's not the same.
Yeah. That's interesting. Like we could think of fullness on a scale like where you are extreme levels of fullness, but I like what you're saying is like what if we just call it something else? We call it stuffed. We call it painful stomach expansion. There's got to be
Yeah.
something else we could
Yeah,
call it, right?
over full, right?
Yeah,
Like overly
overfull.
full.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's not even on the scale. Exactly. That is not at all what we're talking about, right? Like it's not about being stuffed. It's
Mhm.
about eating until you're good. Your
Yeah.
tummy's full in a way that it's supposed to be, in the way that it's designed to be.
Yeah. And now I imagine and I know from working with people and from experiencing this myself, is sometimes that sensation can be really hard to find at first because you are so used to being
Mm.
starving or being stuffed that you may not even be in touch with your body sensations. Like some people say, I don't feel full until I'm stuffed, until I'm overfull. They don't really know what fullness means. So maybe you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. And people may not like this answer, but I'm going to say it anyway. It's messy figuring out what comfortably full means.
Mhm.
I can't tell you, right? Like, I mean, I can't tell you with any specificity. I can explain what it means to me. And I'm sure you, Kathryn, can explain what it means to you, but nobody's inside your body, right? For me, it's this sensation of like, I'm not hungry anymore and I'm not lightly sated. I'm full. I'm not going to be thinking about food for several hours because I've eaten enough and I am satiated. Like I'm good. I just it's that feeling of that hit the spot. I am done for a while until my next meal. But I didn't figure that out until I had eaten meals where I went past that. And I don't mean past that to binge levels. I mean where I ate and I was like, "Oh, that's a little too much food."
Mhm.
Or I ate in a way and I was hungry really quickly and I was like, oh, that wasn't quite enough food. It's it's a messy process, just like figuring out your formula, the foods that love you back is a messy process. It's not something that you do in a second. You have to figure that out for yourself. I feel like it's the same thing with figuring out what's the proper amount of fullness for you.
Yeah. Yeah, I really love how you describe that as far as it there being some experimentation that's necessary, and that's okay. Like if you eat an amount that you think is going to lead to a normal level of fullness and you end up being overfull, then maybe you adjust next time and maybe eat a little less. If you eat too little and you end up being hungry again really soon, then adjust again. Like it never has to be perfect. So I really like that. And it's about being kind to yourself through that process. If you end up a little bit more full than you expected, it's not beating yourself up over it. It's not thinking you did anything wrong. It's just thinking, "Oh, I have some feedback from my body now that I can adjust and make improvements next time."
Yeah, I love that, right? It's you get curious through the whole process. Oh, I'm going to put my researcher hat on. I'm going to figure out what does full mean to me?
Yeah,
Where's my full meter? Like where's the gauge just right so that I feel really good?
yeah,
And doing it with that curiosity so that you can say, "Oh, this much, this gives me really great energy. This much, it's a little too much, or this much, it's not quite enough. This much is just right." But and then the other piece, as you said, it's not just about it's being kind to yourself. Yes, if you overshoot it or undershoot it, but also being very careful not to ever use that as a reason to binge,
yeah,
right? So like I didn't eat enough, so now I better binge. Or I ate a little too much, now I've blown it, so I might as well binge, right? It's
yeah,
going into it eyes wide open. I'm figuring out what fullness is for me. I'm going to get urges because this is going to be uncomfortable. So my brain is going to say something's gone wrong here. You didn't eat enough or you ate too much. So you better binge.
yeah. Yeah, I love that. It gets back to what we talked about in our No Matter What podcast that no matter what level of fullness you're at, right? You don't binge. You ate a little too little, you don't binge. You ate a little too much, you don't binge. You just make adjustments and you keep eating in the range of normal and realize that that is a pretty wide range, right? So, yeah, I mean, dismissing that thought of, oh, my fullness level isn't perfect, so I might as well binge. That's really,
Right.
really a big key in recovery.
Right, right. And it gets back to that whole notion that we're always talking about that there's no perfect amount.
Mhm.
There just isn't.
Yeah.
There's no perfect meal, there's no perfect amount. And we're so used to, diet plans that say this many ounces and this many cups. And, it's not about that. Like we are not a math equation. Our bodies are not math equations. And from day to day, our hunger levels ebb and flow. So it's going to be a little messy. And people get very uncomfortable with that, but that's the truth of it. So that's where it's be curious, be compassionate as you're
Yeah.
doing it.
Yeah, and also because physiologically, like there are reasons that it is harder to figure it out in the beginning of recovery when you're so used to starving and stuffing. Like when you diet and when you really restrict your food, your body's adaptive response is to actually dim your fullness signals. It's actually to make you so that you can eat more and you want to eat more and you don't feel as full. It's
Mm,
that part of that survival reaction. So, like, if you've been dieting, understand that you may not feel your fullness as much right away, and you might have to use your higher brain at first to decide on amounts that you know are normal and adequate, and you might not get those signals. But as you eat adequately day after day after day, they will start to reemerge. And then on the other side, when you're used to stuffing yourself and really expanding your stomach, then your stomach is used to that stretching and that expanding, so that normal amounts of food may not lead to the stomach to expand enough to signal your brain that it's full. So it's allowing these physiological processes to reset and being patient with yourself through that process.
yeah, really good. Really good. It's so important to be patient. And I think that's a big piece here also is this notion of consistent, adequate meals. And in the beginning, I'm always coaching people to pick some times, put yourself on a clock, let your body adapt to that. Because what happens is pretty quickly, your body will come to expect food at regular intervals. And that will help normalize things all along the way. So even though it can feel counterintuitive if you've just been binging for a really long time, like just commit, like I'm going to eat adequate meals no matter what. I'm going to do it on a clock. I'm going to gauge not based on my actual stomach, but based on like what a normal amount of food looks like in the beginning. And then I'm going to figure it out along the way. Our bodies like consistency, and it's really calming and soothing to the brain, to the body to be eating regular, adequate, consistent meals with space in between. And in the beginning, just take a guess. It's not an exact science. Just put some food on a plate, call it good, see how it goes, and then tweak and adapt all the way through. Because it's really like if you can recognize that one meal is not going to make or break you. And it just starts somewhere.
Yeah.
Start somewhere, see how you go, right? And then with that consistency over time, things start to normalize.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like that a lot because when your body learns to expect food on a consistent schedule, it can be flexible. Your hunger signals and fullness signals start to reemerge. It really does help. Like that consistency helps so much in the
Mm-hmm.
reemergence of your hunger and fullness signals.
And in every way, I mean, it helps to normalize your hormone levels, to your enzymes, like your digestive enzymes. Everything starts to normalize with that consistency. So it
Yeah.
helps in every way. And if it's okay, like I want to talk a little bit about like the delights of being full, because
Yeah.
I think there's this, like I really want to like reclaim it. Like that's what I'm saying. Like I want us to reclaim that word. Like fullness is a good thing, you know and I think again with dieting, it's not this, oh, I'm so full thing. No, it's like I'm full, good, it's good, because
Yeah.
there's a lot of like comfort and satisfaction when you're full, right? Like your food is going to give you energy and vitality, and that's a beautiful thing, especially when you've walked around. I know that I spent decades walking around starving most of the time, or so full and wondering what I was going to do, like how I was going to function. That's a horrible way to live versus like, oh, I'm good. I've got energy and vitality from my food. It gives you mental clarity. You're not thinking about food because you've eaten enough. You're good. You're
Yeah.
good. Your brain doesn't want to think about food anymore because you've actually filled your belly.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think saying positive statements to yourself, which we've talked about, I know on the show before, can really help reinforce that. So when
Hmm.
you eat and you notice those nice sensations of fullness, say something positive. That hit the spot.
Hmm.
That was
Hmm.
delicious. Oh, this is going to give me energy.
Yes. And just getting back to what we were saying before, saying positive things, yes. And then also, I want you all to notice and note the emotional stability that comes with eating regular, adequate meals. People take that for granted, but you know, when you are in that binge restrict cycle, the people in your life suffer. a lot of the time because it really impacts your mood. It can make you irritable. It can make you, unavailable. You're there with half your brain because you're either worried about like where you're going to get nourishment from or how to deal with the overnourishment you've been giving yourself. And so that regular, adequate nutrition with consistency, all of a sudden your mood stabilizes, right? It's an amazing thing. And the other thing is not eating enough or binging are such a stressor on the body. It's not just like the impact that it has on you physically, but there's such an impact emotionally. And so that eating until you're full and eating regular meals, it takes away this stress of starvation or binging,
Yeah.
which is pretty amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. When you can start to see the benefits of it in your life, it motivates you to want to keep doing it. And it allows you to start developing those positive connections in your brain to the feeling of fullness. Because, like we've talked about, there may have been some negative connections that have been conditioned in your brain. And I think it's important to be aware of that. Like, you don't want to dwell on that, but be aware when those thoughts pop up. I think a lot of people have developed a connection that fullness means weight gain, and that's somewhere
Hmm.
in the brain.
Hmm.
Like, and I think it's because of diet culture. I think it's because of the messaging we're receiving, even from being a young child, right? Like, you shouldn't be too full, you shouldn't eat too much, you shouldn't gain weight. And so we've made that connection, but fullness does not equal weight gain. And when you learn that that connection is false, that fullness does not lead to weight gain, that you feel it, your body digests it, you process it, you use it for energy, and then you're hungry again. Once you go through that many times and realize fullness doesn't equal weight gain, you can start to let that go.
That's right. That's right. And that productive discomfort of growth that I'm always talking about, right? So like at first, it's going to be uncomfortable to eat until you're full and you're going to there is all of those fears are going to come up. I'm going to gain weight. I did something wrong. Like I shouldn't be full, whatever it is. This is unusual. This feels weird. All of those things. Not a reason to binge, not a reason to restrict, a reason to say, "Oh, good. This is my chance to change my brain."
Yeah.
I'm going to allow the urge to binge or restrict here and let it move through me and trust that I'm going to start to get used to this.
Yeah, and any negative thought that pops into your head, any negative feeling, you can know that it's optional. You can know that
Mhm.
you can shift that thought to a more positive thought about the sensations that you're feeling, because it's not the sensations of fullness that are the problem. It's the thoughts that you're having around those sensations.
That's right.
I actually use this example. I have an audio in the Brain Over Binge course about hunger and fullness. And growing up, my parents were like exact opposites on this end. My mom came from an environment where food was more scarce. So I think fullness was such a joy to her that when she would feel
Love it.
full throughout her whole life, she's like, "Oh, this feels so good. I'm so full. This is so amazing." And then my dad came from more of a weight conscious environment. So when he was full, he would say the exact opposite, like, "Oh, I ate too much. I can't believe I ate all that." So I was receiving like completely opposite messages. But the point here is that it's the same sensation.
Of
And
course.
two people, depending on their history, their mindset, can interpret that sensation in a completely different way. So,
Mhm.
yeah, I hope that example just helps you realize that the sensations are neutral and your thoughts about them are optional.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I love it. I remember that example very well.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, and if we even think about like little babies when they're good and full, like they're rubbing their tummies versus grown-ups who are like, oh no, I ate too much.
Hmm.
Right? It's like fear or love, right? Like which path are you taking here? And again, the delight of being full, it's that enhanced enjoyment of life. Right? Like this freedom to own your appetite with full permission and full pleasure,
Yeah.
knowing you can socialize, you can go out to eat, you can contribute to meals, you can be part of society in that way without fear, knowing I'm going to eat, I'm going to enjoy the meal, and then I'm going to get on with things because I'm not going to be
Mhm.
trying to restrict at this event, or I'm not going to overstuff myself either. I'm not going to do either. I'm going to eat until I'm full and get back to whatever else it is that I want to do with my day or my life.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. And one more thing I want to bring up here is that, and this happened for me, and I know it happens in others as well, is the brain, the lower brain sometimes will associate something positive with being overly full. And I want to try to explain that a little here is that when you binge, after a period of restriction, the brain can like reward that overly full sensation because you need the food, right? You're starving. It's this survival response. So there can be this temporary reward of being overly full, which very quickly leads to pain and to shame and to just physical effects that we've talked about here. But there can be this odd temporary reward in it. And I think part of reclaiming fullness is reclaiming appropriate levels of fullness and realizing if your brain is encouraging you like, oh, that's not enough fullness, you need to be like stuffed and so you can't even move, like sometimes the brain will actually encourage that when you are a binge eater. So it's really reclaiming that middle ground on fullness and dismissing the thought that being overly full has any benefit to you whatsoever.
Absolutely. Again, and that gets back to again putting your researcher hat on and going into this with curiosity and kindness and compassion and notice and eyes wide open, right? Getting back to what I was saying earlier, that when you're engaging in this practice of figuring out full for you, like comfortable fullness for you, that your brain may say, keep going,
Mhm.
right? Oh, you better keep going, or, you better not eat too much. Like it could be a both and. And so going into it with that awareness in mind, like I'm used to binging, my stretch receptors are all stretched out, so like I'm going to be eating this much, and my brain is going to say, where's my fourth and fifth plate?
Mhm.
And you say, no, I've had two plates. That's good. I'm stopping here. Whatever it is, you decide on an amount in advance with your higher brain, and then let your lower brain do whatever it does, and trust that that's the way you're healing both your brain and your fullness meters.
Yeah. And yeah, and as you do that, and as you learn that normal levels of fullness feel good, you'll stop desiring that over full feeling in any way whatsoever. Like
Totally.
rationally it's painful, rationally it's not good for you, but if there's some desire, just trust that that will go away. Like you'll start to see that as the exact opposite of pleasure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that always gets back to the notion that binging always and only makes everything worse. And even if your lower brain is saying, "Oh, it's going to feel so good," that's just that motivational try of the brain in action, but it is the opposite of pleasure.
Yeah.
And it uses up way more energy actually to recover from a binge than to just eat a nice meal.
Yeah. Yeah, Julie,
Yeah.
this has all been extremely helpful. Are there any final thoughts on
I
reclaiming
mean,
fullness?
just like as you were saying before, it's all about the way that you approach it. How are you going to be thinking about fullness going forward? And so say it with me, right? It's good to be full. I'm reclaiming fullness. I'm full. That hit the spot. I am so well nourished. My body loves being nourished. My body knows exactly what to do with this food. I'm going to have so much energy for the day. Whatever works for you, but really start to reframe fullness for yourself so that you can reclaim it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I love that. Awesome. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much for having this conversation
My
with me.
pleasure. My pleasure. Thanks, Kathryn.
Awesome.